Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. A big question everybody's asking is has Russia lost the war in Ukraine? The recent withdrawal from the Kherson region or the Kherson city has prompted these questions. There are a lot of rumors inbound and there is a lot of talk about what is going to happen next. Let's try and decipher through what is happening, what we know till now, and figure out what is the actual reason of this move that the Russians have made. It is important to understand that this war is not over yet. Uh, a tactical battle, which probably the Russians have lost, or the Ukrainians have won. Either ways, we'll have to look at it and we'll have to figure out what is happening in this entire game. Before I move forward, guys, please like this video, subscribe, check your bell icons to ensure that you're getting the notifications as soon as I put up videos. Because big events like this, videos will have to come up at random times. Of course, the night schedule still remains open. If you can, please do support Dev Talks by becoming a member, clicking on the thanks button to send us a super chat or a super sticker. Or, of course, you can directly contribute to me at the UPI number mentioned below on your screen. Check out the website, thedevtalks.com. Let's get into it. There's some big news that came out of the Russia-Ukraine war recently. As a matter of fact, today, late night yesterday and early morning today, which spoke about that Russia has basically withdrawn its forces from the western bank of the Dnieper River, which goes down south from the entire region. Now, there was a little bit of a bridgehead that was created where this river was going. And, that's one of the reasons why this particular bridgehead was termed to be untenable, in the sense that it was very difficult for the Russians to kind of maintain that. I'm just telling you right now what the Russians have put out into the mainstream media, what the Russians are talking about. After that, we'll kind of dig into this entire thing and try and figure out what exactly is happening. For that, as usual, I have prepared some slides. Let's start off. Has Russia lost the war in Ukraine? Big question. Withdrawal from Kherson is something that we'll have to study. Right, let's see what are the rumors. Some rumors talk about, if you listen to the Ukrainian side of the story, in terms of the Telegram channels and so on and so forth, Ukrainians say that, there were massive advances of the Ukrainian forces in this region and the Russians have kind of backed off. There are certain channels that are talking about that. I won't say all. Major Russian losses have taken place in this particular area, where the Russians have found this place that the cost of maintaining this particular place in terms of equipment and manpower have been very high. Now, please understand, when I'm saying this, these are all rumors that have been floating around on the internet and on Telegram channels and so on and so forth. I can't corroborate any of this. So this is what the rumor says at the moment. The third rumor says that it's a diplomatic move by the Russians. There is some sort of a negotiation on. Let's put a pin into that. I'll talk to you when we speak about Jake Sullivan's recent visit. And of course, the fourth big thing that people talk about is the American pressure on Russia. Recently, if you guys have seen my previous video on the Ukraine war update, I have spoken to you about this concept of the coalition of the willing, which is a combination of forces from certain countries who are willing to go into battle within Ukraine. Mind you, this is not NATO. That is interesting for me to realize, that this is a coalition of willing of the forces from Europe and probably somewhere else. I am not sure. But this is not NATO. That means NATO is not willing to do this. There is obviously certain opposition within NATO towards this particular move. Right. Leaving that apart, there is supposedly about 90,000 total soldiers which are on the borders of Ukraine right now, threatening to enter inside. And that is what is being said. So 90,000 soldiers, which is the coalition of willing, which is supposed to have about 40,000 US soldiers, 30,000 Polish soldiers, 20,000 Romanian and other mercenaries and other soldiers, and so on and so forth. Now, remember, this is something which is like an abstract group of forces that have been put together. How far are they trained together? How far are they linked together? Are their communications sorted out? Do they have effective air defense?
so on and so forth, has not been spoken about at all. It just speaks about this coalition of willing forces which are there. As a matter of fact, this particular coalition of willing has been facing some sort of a backlash within NATO countries. Slovakia had a little bit of a backlash. There have been protests in Hungary, and for this coalition of willing the forces to actually come down into Moldova in the southwest of Ukraine, they could not cross Hungary because there were massive protests and the government did not allow these forces to go forward. My point being, there is opposition to this entire thing from NATO. Now, the coalition of willing is not a rumor because it has been spoken about, but the pressure which is being exerted by these particular forces is supposed to be the rumor behind the Russian withdrawal from the Western Bank. Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor of the USA, was in Ukraine and reportedly was also in secret talks with some Russian officials. As Reuters report that I've put up here, it says Biden eyed held talks with Russian officials amongst nuclear tensions. The Wall Street Journal reports this was during last week this week itself, when he visited and met the Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian foreign minister and the national security advisor as well. So that is something very interesting that this particular gentleman was here, which drove rise to certain rumors, which I'm going to put out here. So, this particular rumor is a little wild, but hear me out, and this is what it says. It says that Sullivan proposed Zelensky the formula draft of the negotiation track with Russia, which should become the basis of the new Minsk, Istanbul, or Riyadh 3. Now, Riyadh is an interesting thing because please remember, Saudi Arabia was also involved in the release of some of the most hardened right wing Ukrainian prisoners of war that were taken from places like Azovstal and many other battles which were fought with these particular regiments belonging to the right sector, forces belonging to the right sector, right? So this particular thing brings in the Saudi angle, which is very very interesting. How the Americans are planning to kind of talk to the Saudis because of the basis tension which is on between both the countries is not being substantiated by this particular rumor, so it kind of falls flat bang in the beginning. But let's just for fun's sake read what it is all about. It says Ukraine gets Kherson with front established along the Dnieper River. Now that is something interesting because that's exactly what we see happening. So this particular rumor has gained a little ground. These of the conflict along the line along Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions, wherever the lines are currently, they just freeze and not move forward or backward in any way. Ukraine receives electricity from Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Remember, 40% of Ukraine today does not have power. And that's a big, big problem. And I'll discuss that as we go forward. Ukraine critical infrastructure no longer to be bombed, and which is, I think, one of the biggest grudge points that the Ukrainians have. Remember, when this war has been going on for the past 8 months, Ukrainian citizens living in cities like Kiev, living in cities like Lvov, have had pretty much a normal life. They were out to restaurants, there were parties, and there were open air theaters, and this and that and the other. So they've had a normal sort of a life. But this war, because of this infrastructure bombing, has been brought to them to bear, and that I guess was one of the Russian objectives. Uh, the West will provide a loan of about $50 billion and some Russia's frozen confiscated assets to rebuild Ukraine. And separately, Kiev receives modern air defense systems and artillery and tanks. So basically, again, NATO arms another army. This is a proposal that was given by Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor to President Zelensky. No mention of this particular thing to going to Russia or anything of that sort. So, more or less, I don't think this would be a very viable solution, but it could be a place that the Americans want the Ukrainians to start the negotiations. Right? You have to start the negotiations somewhere and then kind of do a little bit of give and take and move forward. So, that's a rumor, right? Big question. How come there is a change in the tune from Washington? That's something that is very interesting, and I've done a video on this as well with regards to the change. And when the US had suddenly said that there are troops their troops are there on the ground in Ukraine. So what has changed? Has the elections kind of changed the entire game? Have the elections, the results as of now, as as we speak, are not out? It's a sort of a bit of a tension with regards the Senate, as a matter of fact, which is going forward. So are the elections kind of changing the tune in Washington, or is the EU, which is bearing through a lot of pressure? And we've seen the EU leadership coming out and atomizing the United States with regards to its trade policies, and it's recently passed this inflation coverage sort of a thing that they did for their own country. So there is a bit of a tussle between the United States and EU. Of course, there are certain countries within Europe who are not pro this particular war. Countries like Slovakia, countries like Hungary. There are so many countries which are now changing tune, and I will discuss as we go forward. So, this is a big question that we need to ask, which I personally at the moment think it's a combination of events and probably a factor of understanding that this war is kind of going nowhere. And if we do continue with it, it's going to start hurting us in a place where we will not be able to recover from in a faster sort of a time frame. Now, we are talking about negotiations. My next point is that can this war actually end with negotiations right now? Uh, it seems a bit difficult because at the end of it, if you have gotten into a battle, both the sides have a certain objective, and if those objectives are not met, there is a certain section of the society or the certain section of the leadership within both the countries that would not be happy with the outcome. Right? Let's talk about Ukraine. There is a certain section called the right sector. I'm sure we know about this. There are these right-wing neo-Nazis affiliated organizations which are pretty much touted to be in control of Ukraine and exert a lot of pressure on the civilian leadership. Will these guys who are dead against Russians accept any sort of negotiations? There would be an uneasy peace. That is something which we need to understand. When a war is brought to an end without a particular conclusion, both the parties will be itching to kind of create a small incident so that they could achieve short term objectives in kind of moving forward. Subversive attacks will continue. Subversion, what I mean to say subversion is you will have terrorist based attacks, you will have guerrilla tactics which will take place. Uh, I want to ask, and I asked this question very clearly on the slide, if that is what is going to happen, what is the difference between the past 8 years before this war and what will happen in the future? Because that's exactly what used to happen. Russian rebels were supposed to be attacking Ukrainian troops, and Ukrainian right wing, people are have been reported to be attacking the Russian side of it. So how would this entire thing change? It will create another more heated and a more diverse sort of a this thing which will always teetering on the brink of war. Politically it won't be viable for either one. You think, if everybody thinks that Vladimir Putin is all powerful in Russia, that's something that one needs to understand. Please look at the kind of rhetoric which is coming out from the Russian channels, from the Russian telegram channels, from the Russian public about this particular withdrawal from Kherson. They take it as an offense. Any more sort of pushback from in any way would result in a lot of weakening for Vladimir Putin himself within Russia. There are certain hardliners that were not happy with what happened in Kharkiv when the Ukrainian counteroffensive took place. These are guys like the head of the Wagner group. These are guys like Kadyrov, who's the head of the Chechen Republic. Now, these are guys that are not, for any backtracking by the Russians. As far as Ukraine is concerned, of course, the entire leadership, it will be politically inviable for them to kind of sit down and talk to Russia after all that they've done in terms of a rhetoric against them. Politically, I think it is going to get bad for the US. And, in case that the Russians gain a certain edge in terms of negotiations, it's going to get even worse for the US. Look at it and put the events in focus. You've had Joe Biden, and what will be associated with him would be Afghanistan, would be COVID, and the future after that would be also the debacle in Ukraine. And that's something I'm sure Joe Biden would be keenly aware of. Let's move forward. This is amazing, right? Let's read this news from the CBS, which says Russia withdrawing troops from Kherson, but Ukrainian authorities are a bit skeptical. Now that's very interesting. When we look at a place that the Ukrainians have been trying since August to take back, and the Kherson offensive has been spoken about for such a long time. It's August, September, October, and November. In the middle, the Russians go back, and the Ukrainians are saying that they are skeptical. Now, it's a trap, is what some people are saying. The French intelligence, for that matter, gave out a statement that this is a trap for the Ukrainians. By the way, these are the French intelligence are the same guys who withdrew as of yesterday and before that completely from Mali because of the Wagner Group's operations in that particular region. So, need I say more? The Ukrainian operational headquarters south believes that the retreat of Russian Federation armed forces from Kherson may be a part of an information psychological operation to mislead the armed forces of Ukraine. Speaker of the Operational Command South, Natalia Gumenyuk, said. Now, that could be quite possible. I mean, I'm not going to discount anything. The Russians are well known for creating traps like this. They've done it all through the Second World War, where they invited the Germans into a sort of a, into a certain region, and then they closed it off, literally surrounding that entire force. And, you all know what happens after that. But it seems a little unlikely. But the main thing that I want to pick up is the Ukrainian resistance to kind of believe the fact that they can now take back a region that they claimed was theirs and were fighting for it for the past 4 months. Is it that the Ukrainians have gotten a hammering so bad that they are scared to go inside? And a lot of Ukrainian channels are actually talking about that to be careful, because this is how the Russians do. The Russians have marked this place with missile, with air defense, and with, of course, a lot of artillery fire. And the minute the Ukrainians would go inside, hell will break loose. Could happen, could not happen. I'm not very sure. But the sheer factor that the Ukrainians are hesitant to go inside there tells you the kind of psychological effect that the Russian war has had on the Ukrainian leadership and, of course, the Ukrainian forces. The optics. Let's talk about that. For Ukraine, as I was telling you, there's no celebrations. They're not like, oh, yay. When the Kharkiv thing happened, they were celebrating. It was all over the internet. The Russians ran away. We don't have that today. It's a very subdued sort of this thing. And especially people sitting abroad with that little Ukrainian flag stuck on their profile are celebrating. But I don't see that from the regular Twitter and Telegram channels that I follow, who would jump to joy, celebrating this sort of a move. Uh, Another thing is that the Russians are in retreat right now. There are no orders that anybody sees, and this is not coming out in the battlefield reports that are coming out from that particular region since yesterday, since this order was issued to hit back on the retreating Russians. The Russians seems to be quietly walking off from there with their equipment and their complete manpower, which is in the tune of about 115,000 people. And that's what been reported by the Russian Defense Ministry. And they don't have any major attacks coming their way during this particular retreat. How bad is that in terms of an optic? You have an opportunity where the enemy has got your enemy has got his back to the wall and you're not hitting him. Tells you something. For the Russians, it's a bad optic. Let me just tell you, it is a horrible optic. If you needed to, and if you did decide to leave this particular region, and which seems to be a not a new decision, it seems to be a decision that was taken a while ago. Why did you have to, conduct referendums in that particular place, chest thumping, this is ours and this and that? All that stuff was done by the Russians. Remember that. They also, yes, evacuated the civilian population, but in a way, they've also ditched them. They've ditched their homes, their livelihoods, and everything. I'm sure when they evacuated the civilian population, they didn't tell them that, listen, we're going to be running away from here as well. This is untenable for us. Politically, the opposition and the hardliners are not happy with this. Please look at the Telegram channels, and they are abusive. They talk about their leadership and their generals being fat, old, lazy, more interested in personal propaganda, photographs, and so on and so forth. The kind of rhetoric which is going across against the Russian leadership with regards to this particular withdrawal is insane. And a lot of people believe that there is a certain opposition within Russia. I am of the firm belief that yes, there is a certain opposition within Russia, but the opposition is to Putin because he's not been able to do the job properly. It is not that he got them into the war. It is that if he's got them into the war, why isn't he delivering a decisive victory? They are asking this question that 300,000 of our sons, husbands, brothers have gone to this particular war, and still we have to back off. So the optics part of it is horrible for the Russians. For the Ukrainians, it is no less better with the kind of statements I've kind of shown to you. The big question we would like to ask is, why should Russia stand and fight in this particular region? Right? Why did they withdraw? Again, this is my impression. I'll talk to you about the regional factors which have going to impact anybody in Russia, and of course the Russian factors that would, or the Russia-Ukraine war sort of a factor that would impact this decision. The Europeans are losing. There is no question about it. We know what's happening in terms of the energy crisis. The Europeans are pretty happy that our gas levels are high right now. We're 100% gas and there's no problems and this and that. Remember one thing, it's like a level, right? The temperature drops, and as I've written, the first snowfall in Poland is taking place. Once that happens, we all know the temperature around across Europe is gonna drop. Have a certain number of friends in the UK, spoke to them, they say temperature is dropping pretty hardcore. If you just look at a simple phone sort of a system which will tell you in Ukraine, the temperature by Friday in the daytime would be 0 degrees and in the night would drop to about -6. And this I'm talking about Bakhmut in the east, where the major battle between the Russians and Ukrainians are taking place. Right, so Europeans are saying our gas levels are full. We don't have a problem for this winter. Gas levels are 100%, temperature starts dropping, the demand starts increasing. When the demand starts increasing, the gas levels start dropping. Once the gas level starts dropping, because the gas will become rarer and rarer and rarer, the prices will start going up. So currently, if the gas prices are under control, the minute the utilization of that entire gas would take place, the prices would again start going up. And where is Europe supposed to get this gas from? The Dutch have said we don't have any more. The Norwegians cannot provide any more. Well, the Ukrainians aren't doing much. The Russians aren't giving it to them. The Africans in Nigeria and a lot of countries where they tried is not going to happen. The Qataris have said we can't do it. The only other option is expensive American gas. So Europe is on the losing end. And this has been said not by me, by President Macron and President Olaf Scholz. So it's their words, not mine. As I said, the first snowfall has already happened. US control has faded. Now, this is something very interesting, and it's sort of a hegemonic function of US to kind of keep a certain control over its loyal subjects, if I may use that particular word very carefully, if I may. Uh, but one sees the control of the United States in terms of the narrative, in terms of how the countries reacting to certain situations is kind of slowing down. They see a certain amount of frustration and a backlash comes out of that particular country for going and doing its own thing. Look what's happening with India, as a matter of fact. The next point, I think me and General Rajiv Narayanan discussed this in grave detail last night in our live. UN is an absolutely incapable body. There is no question about it, and it's a great talk. It's a little bit of a long talk, 1 hour and 30 minutes. Have a check at that. It'll give you a lot of idea as to why I'm saying the US is incapable. The UN is incapable. The world order has shifted from being a omnipolar order where the US was kind of thinking he's the big dog of the place. Today the world has shifted out, and there are other other poles which are being created for what I say. And I say this pretty clearly, that India is going to become the third pole in this particular world. A lot of times, and again, I'll quote General Rajiv Narayanan last night, who said that, when India, there were a lot of countries that actually promoted the thought process of India during the pandemic, and that thing we don't know about because those things were not even broadcast around the world. That's how a narrative is controlled, by the way. Governments in Europe are falling. Sweden has fallen. France is tenuous. Germany has major protests. Greece has issues. As a matter of fact, major protests, violent protests taking place in Athens today. Italy, we know the government has changed. What do I say about UK? I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the third prime minister. Jokes apart, yeah, of course, they've had their problems, and the predominant issue in all these countries is the cost of living crisis, which is built up because of the energy crisis. So let's make that very clear. Why is the energy crisis? Is because of these sanctions against Russia. So regional impact of the Russian moves and the counter moves made against Russia is what I'm telling you. Russian supply cuts and airstrikes in Ukraine will just cost Moldova, which is a small, very tiny, and one of the poorest economies in Europe, $1 billion this month just to cover its energy costs. Just one example, so that you are aware of what kind of impact it can have, this particular fight will have on Europe. Italy's support for Ukraine is subject to debate, and this is a growing number of Italians and Italian lawmakers today saying that enough, we need to stop and re-evaluate what we are doing. This has been the impact of a self-inflicted wound that the the EU has caused itself. Again, my question: why should Russia stand and fight in a small sliver of land? I won't call it strategically important or not, because I'm not a military expert in that particular front. But I'd still ask that question: why should Russia waste energy, manpower, resources when he is pretty much achieving all this with the current fight? One has to ask this question. Just to continue, this massive protest break out in Prague to take down pro-NATO, anti-Russia Czech government. Slovakian government has exported defense items to Russia, and this is a report by Euractiv, which is a very popular newspaper in that particular front. And the third report, which says that the Dutch government has issued 91 waivers against the sanctions against Russia. So the European combined solidarity front, unified front, has actually broken. Uh, was that what Russia wanted in the larger and in a strategic goal beyond the war in Ukraine? I don't know, because Putin would be able to answer that, and I don't have a direct line to him. So another thing, why should Russia stand and fight? And this is about the war itself, right? Pure demographics in Russia. All of us don't understand that the Russian population is a dying and a thinning population. For them, losing people is a big, big problem. It's a big issue. People ask big questions. So that could be one of the things. I would take that into consideration if you would ask me. I don't know if the Russian leadership has. As the Russians say, this particular move would be safer for the Russian troops because of the relentless attacks that the Ukrainians have been doing. Of course, with attacks, people die, people get injured. So this will be a little safer front. There is a dam in that particular river in that area called the Novaya Kakhovka Dam, which has a road and a railway line going across. This particular dam has been under attack for, I guess, about 3 months since the time the HIMARS from the US came into question. And the Ukrainians have been wanting to flood this entire region, ensuring that movement as it is, which is because of the monsoons really bad, it'll become even worse, and the Russian movement forward or behind would become a big challenge. Understand one thing: this Dnieper River is not a small river. Uh, an average of about three odd kilometers wide in this particular region, and it is right now monsoon, so there is a huge amount of water. You can imagine if the dam does get flooded with that kind of water which will be accumulated in the dam, what will happen to that particular region? It's going to be tenuous. So I personally feel that, yeah, it does make a lot of sense to pull your troops off if you know that this particular dam is going to go down the dust. The war is actually in the east. Of course, the Russians have declared Kherson as a part of their region. What they have abandoned right now is the Kherson city, not the region. In the same way, Zaporozhye, they don't own the city as of now. They don't occupy the city. They occupy the rest of the region, which they call an oblast. So the war currently is in the east, in a city called Bakhmut, where the Russians and the Ukrainians are at it with the close to numbers of about 30,000 soldiers against each other right now. The Ukrainians have already lost 10 million people, right? They had a total population of about 44, 46 million people. 10 million have already gone as refugees. because of this entire electricity and infrastructure crisis, the Europeans are saying, and I believe this was a report that came out of the UK, which said about 800,000, Ukrainians could come the direction of the UK itself. Millions of people, in case they lose power and food and stuff like that, are going to go where? They're going to go west towards Europe. Right now, where the war is happening is in a place where is the Ukraine's industrial hub, where it is the agricultural hub of Ukraine. When the sowing season, the farmers are not going to put the food in the ground. What are people going to eat? So there is most likely going to be, and if this whole thing continues, a huge outflow of refugees from Ukraine once again. There have been massive losses to infrastructure. There is just no question about it. And there's a news right next to it. Kiev prepares for a winter with no heat, water, or power. And of course, the mayor of Kiev said that is planning for a total evacuation if it loses electricity. It's about 2 or 3 million people. Where will they take them? It's of course going to be towards Western Europe. And would the Western Europe be able to actually take this influx of people, knowing very well that they are not able to feed and heat up people in their own countries currently? Big question. Eastern part of the region I was telling you is the industrial and resource rich part. The reason for the fight after 2014 Maidan is this. Yes, those ideological this that the Russians are bad and all that stuff. Please understand, a lot of these fights are because of the resources. A lot of people believe that the American fights in the Middle East have been because of the oil. I personally believe so, but it just tells you the fight is in the East because of the resources, right? And if the Russians do control the East, how are the Ukrainians supposed to earn? Which brings me to my next report, which says Ukrainian minister talks about a bigger GDP than possible in 2022 versus earlier forecast of 35%. I mean, you're going to lose 50% of your economy minimum. That's in 1 year. What are you going to do? Right? Even if the Russians today sit down and negotiate, have they lost? They've got 96,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian land under their control. They wanted the Donbass, they wanted the Luhansk, Donbass region, which more or less that they've been able to get. They wanted the fresh water supply to go into Kherson, into Crimea. That they've got. They've got. I won't say fully demilitarization of Ukraine, but the way that the Ukrainians are responding to this withdrawal, one tends to realize that the capacity to fight in Ukraine has gone down quite a bit. Well, the denazification thing is pending. I don't know how the Russians plan to deal with it, because remember, guys, the war is not over. It's going to go on. Some of my thoughts, which I thought, let me just ask some questions out of you. Normally, you guys ask out of me. Let me ask some stuff out of you. Of course, guys, if you do have some questions, I'm not going to, take a long, this thing. Please do put your questions, your thought about my analysis as to what it is. And please understand and remember, this is a preliminary report, and I'm trying to figure out what could be the reasons that anybody would take a decision of this sort, right? One has to realize that there has to be a back ending behind such things that needs to be done before you take decisions like this, right? So let's look at certain things. I think this move should have been made before. Well, it is absolutely, I personally believe this, that if the Russians had withdrawn and straightened up their lines in Kharkiv in the north, they should have done this right now. Why keep a tenuous position and lose more manpower when you know that this is a place that you cannot defend? Go back to a place where you will be able to defend and, you know, uh, keep fighting again. I personally think it would have served the Russians better to do this move earlier. In case increase in Russian diplomatic reach and associations. Look, India is sitting there. Minister Jaishankar is there right now. We bought, the Russians have been the second highest suppliers of oil to us. Let me tell you, for some gentleman who's trying to tell me that it's you who keep supporting Russia, well, I don't support Russia. This is a place where I'm giving you analysis. There is a difference between giving an analysis and me holding the Russian flag or the Georgian cross and running around the place. So please understand, it's not my support to Russia, it is an analysis that I'm giving. And I've also said, please go back to my videos where you will realize where I've also very clearly said the Russians have made mistakes. Not just mistakes, they made blunders. My first point was a Russian mistake itself. Right? So I'm not a blind supporter of Russia or any sort, Mr. Srijan. Please understand that. This is an analytical platform which I'm giving you analysis. You don't agree with it with me, that's perfectly all right. And I will put that comment a little later. Increase in Russian diplomatic reach and association. Look what happened between Russia and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have literally shown the middle finger to the Americans because of their association today. The Russians have been able to strengthen up the BRICS, strengthen up many other direct relations with a lot of other people. It is very, very interesting that there is a certain change in this entire game. Of course, right? An anti Western alliance is forming. A lot of countries are saying, yeah, this is enough. We cannot take this whole Western bulwark anymore. We saw the outburst of various leaders of the world in the UN and how they reacted to this whole thing. So there is an anti-West alliance where people are saying, well, you control the narrative, you control the media, you control the money, you control this. What if tomorrow we get into something and you remove our all our foreign reserves? How are we supposed to do this? So skepticism against their relationship with Russia has increased. Power centers. Now this is something I think General Ryan mentioned last night, which stuck to me. That Lavrov, who's the foreign minister, who said new power centers are being formed. Sir said that he was not in agreement with it. I personally, after a lot of thought, actually realized this is a dangerous thing. If the Russians are actually talking about power centers, it is going back 30 to 40 years where you are creating war alliances. That to me is one of the most dangerous things that we can head towards. And India must put its diplomatic might to ensure power centers are not created. Right? Economy is the Russian economy is stable. There is no question. People have heat, people have fuel, people have food. There's nothing wrong with that. Their exports have gone up, their markets are looking good, their economy, their currency is looking good. It's been stable for a long time now. Right? So what gives or what why would Russia actually escalate this war, go into an all-out war, resulting in further alienation from the countries that are supporting it right now, than maintain itself in a certain slow edge pace, probably take a little bit of a hit here and there, but keep the world or whatever is the world behind it. Something that we must remember. The Russians have been able to play the diplomatic game very, very well. Although a lot of countries don't support what the Russians have said or are doing in Ukraine, but the outright condemnation for these particular things are is not there, right? Putin should keep the fire burning. If I was Putin, I would do that. I would just keep it burning and ensure that secure yourself. Don't make mistakes like this where optics become a problem for you. That would be my recommendation. Of course, I am not a guy who's planning his battle, so he might know more than me. At the moment, with what I know, I would say that the pressure on the EU and the US is quite apt, and he's able to actually achieve certain things which are beyond the battlefield. Remember, this war is just not in Ukraine, it's a war of economics, it's a war of attrition, which is taking place between the East and the West, right? And the global South sits there like us and wonders what happens. Is it a diplomatic move with the G20 coming away and some of the Indian visits going forward? Is there some negotiations that that Indians are trying to do? Something that we'll have to see in the future. There have been a couple of news articles about it. I won't want to take it beyond a certain rhetoric, but let's see. American tune has suddenly changed. And Savi, thank you so much for this contribution. And you've also asked this particular question that why is America suggesting Zelensky to change? Well, as I said in the beginning, there are three, four things which I personally feel. Europeans are weakening out. There's a lot of opposition to this particular war. You've seen how the leaders of the West, especially in America, were heckled against their actions in this thing. But yeah, that doesn't count for much. Politicians do get heckled all the time. There is a certain growing sense of insecurity within America with regards to the economy. There is a sense of growing insecurity within Europe with regards to the economy. And if Europe falls, the American hegemony in that part of the world would take a big beat. I think the Americans are beginning to realize this, that they can keep supplying and keep dragging this war on, but at the end of it, it's not going to change anything in terms of a defeat. It won't result in a defeat or a government change in Russia. At least that's what I see at the moment. EU is expecting 8 million refugees more. As I said, this is a news article that I picked up somewhere, which talks about the huge amount of refugees that EU might just receive because of these latest attacks that the Russians have done on the infrastructure of Ukraine. So there's a bit of a challenge with regards to this entire thing. I think the West is feeling the pressure. My bottom line and my personal take, the Russians probably made a mistake in terms of their calculations during the beginning of the war when they actually crossed over into the Kherson region, into a place where that I'm sure a lot of military planners would have realized is untenable because it's across a river, and how do you logistically supply it? The second mistake would be to kind of pull your troops back during the time when you were regularizing your lines. And the new General Surovikin, had mentioned that he would be probably taking these hard decisions if required. So I think this decision should have been taken a little bit earlier. Third point is that the Russians need to understand and clear out their objectives, because them talking about Kharkiv, Odessa, here, there, and everywhere is not going to help their objectives in any way on the ground. They don't have the infantry forces to go forward and create those kind of attacks, that the big arrow attacks that we would want on the map, want to see on the map, or the big arrow attacks that are coming out. But of course, they do have certain amount of forces that would be coming up after this mobilization to carry out probably their stated objectives in terms of taking up territories on of wherever they are interested. And mostly I think it's going to be concentrated towards Donbass. It might be concentrated towards the north, towards the Kharkiv region. I don't think they will cross back the Dnieper into Kherson in the future, but let's see. I don't know where it goes. Right, so that's all I had to say. I think it's a well thought of move in the wrong time, done it the wrong way. uh, Militarily, it makes a lot of sense. I spoke to a couple of people who agreed with me that you kind of go back from a place where which is tenuous and difficult to defend, rather than actually stand there and lose lives of as it is that you've got less. So it doesn't kind of make sense, but it does make sense to come back and create a hardened line across the Dnieper, which is not a small obstacle to cross. And when the Ukrainians do try a counteroffensive, it'll be very easy for the Russians to defend themselves. That's all I had, as a matter of fact, as an opening analysis. Let's see what you guys have to say. Manda says if the Russian reserves and NATO coalition forces clash, then gives the Russia to an excuse to expand the war beyond Ukraine. Sir, a lot of people have been talking about that, and that's the funny part of the rhetoric. On one part, everybody says that the Russians are wanting to take over Europe with regards to their actions and stuff like that. On the second breath, they mention that the Russian army is so stupid and so weak they can't even fight in Ukraine. So I don't think that the Russians have the capability at the moment, even with the mobilization, to actually expand this war. They would be looking at not doing that at all. They've mentioned that very clearly. Having said that, a certain little thing seems to be a little curious to me is the amount of Russian forces which are there in Belarus. It seems to be about 120,000 soldiers with a whole set of armored equipment over there. What is going to happen from the north? Is it just a pressure point on Kiev, or is this going to be a negotiation tactic? Is something that we will have to see. That they might have withdrawn from Kherson to streamline themselves, to strengthen themselves, so that they could attack from the north. I'm not sure. Might just happen, might not just happen. This is something that, you know, I'm just trying to do an analysis with what information is available in the public domain. It is difficult for me to actually give you a concrete answer, but this is something that we see. Ma'am, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining in. Do connect with me. I've been trying, I wrote a message to you also. I think you're very concerned about the students uh, in Ukraine. She's got concerns that she's raised up on my channel about how do students kind of continue with their studies in Ukraine with this entire thing escalating all the time, which is a very, very, it's a very sad state of affairs as far as the humanitarian cost is concerned. Yes, and I'd also like to address Mr. Srijan, who says, of course, Russia has already lost the war. It lost back in March when it was caught off guard outside of Kiev. It is you who keeps still supporting Ukraine, Russia. Thank you so much for your comments. I told you it is not me who's supporting Russia. I am just trying to analyze situations. As a matter of fact, you can go back to the start of the war. I had very clearly said one little thing that I'm going to repeat. The Russians put themselves under a lot of pressure the day they crossed the border of Ukraine. They would have won this war without actually starting it. That is my opinion, right? I am an analyst. I am not a supporter or a flag carrying Russian. I don't have any particular love for them or anyone else. The only country I do love is my own, and I'm proud of that. So thank you for your comment and stay tuned to keep watching. If you could do some analysis on what I'm saying, if I am able to change your mind, fair enough. If I'm not, I'm happy as I'm happy always. It is not support to Russia. It's in the interest of India and India alone. Thank you, Vijay Saab. I think you've mentioned it, and that's why I put up your comment here. Uh, the more the war drags on, the rest of the world goes against the West, and more West suffers. Remember, if this winter goes bad for Germany, it would be deindustrialized. So the deindustrialization has already started. Audi's moved away. There are a lot of other BMW and other companies that have known to have moved away from there. There is a largest metal works, if I'm not mistaken, company which has a turnover of about $93 billion. And as a joke, that this had mentioned that it uses the same amount of gas as Switzerland. That company is shutting down. So you can imagine the kind of impact that will have. Germany has a socially developed sort of a life where they take care of their citizens and so on and so forth. How will they do stuff like that when they're not able to actually pay basic bills? How will they be able to have this welfare state going forward when they're not able to sustain themselves? Wonder how. You also say that the Russians didn't just make mistakes at the beginning, they're still doing them some now. A lot of their actions didn't make any sense. Absolutely. I think the timing of this particular withdrawal is stupid. Let me just put that across. They could have done that before. If they had to do it, if you know that this particular area is tenuous, if you know that you're not going to advance further into Odessa from this area right now, get back, streamline your lines. Why would you want to stick your neck out in a moving train where you would? I mean, it's like those guys in Bombay, hanging out of the local train and trying to miss these khambas. I mean, it's silly and stupid. Just be inside so that you save yourself. One missed call, and you know what's going to happen to you. So yeah, I find that to be highly silly, and the entire optics of this entire thing, especially for the Russian people or the Russian favoring people in that particular region, would be very, very bad. Janet Yellen is in India. Did she yell at us? There she, Kiran Saab, there she. And thank you so much, Kiran, for becoming a member. It's really nice that so many of you actually joined this particular channel by becoming members and stuff like that. Thank you so much. I think you just became a member last night. Thank you. Uh, exactly. They thought they went in and they would win. Of course, yes. The Russian trap. Europeans are saying that the US does not want war with Russia and EU is moving closer. So the Europeans are saying the US has very clearly said it themselves. We don't want to get inside here. No. You remember Zelensky after the entire thing had said, oh, we should. I'm taking this membership. I'm signing this papers after the referendum took place. What did Jens Stoltenberg say the next day? He says, no, there is no such thing. No, 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 no. He had to pull back from that entire thing. So, where is this whole Western unity that comes out to be? I mean, the US still does not want to fight this war. There are certain people within the US that might want to. And of course, I know for a fact that the Polish are reaching to get into this entire fracas. By withdrawing, our Russians are trying to indicate that to the world that they are ready to negotiate. Yeah, of course. As I said, it could be a diplomatic move. It could be a move in goodwill. You don't know how these things happen. You don't know if there is a back channel communication happening between the Russians and the Ukrainians. A couple of months ago, we know for a fact that General Shoigu, who's the defense minister, and the defense minister of the Ukraine, actually spoke on the phone for certain reasons. I don't know how that conversation was, what was it all about, but they did. So I don't know if there are back channel conversations happening right now. Negotiations are always very overheated. When negotiations are happening, normally wars do escalate. So you really don't know what's actually happening there. Some theories are which say this move can be a diversion. It sure could be, sir. As I said, they could move back here, create a lot of focus on this side, and attack from the north or anywhere else for that matter. So I don't know. It could be a absolute. And you also say that this can be a trap placed deliberately. The French say so, and the Ukrainians themselves think so. So I really don't know. I mean, it doesn't look like so, but yeah, of course, the Russians would have the place under missile, rocket, and aerial fire, and it would be marked for attack. So that's, I don't think the Russians would have much difficulty in taking out uh, any formation that kind of becomes visible in the Kherson region. Somehow I feel USA caught Russia in the trap of going to war. It is us who think Putin is smart, but I think Russia just made a mistake. Absolutely right. This whole game has been played since 2014 and even before that. And I mentioned this couple of times in my show that there's a RAND study of 2019. Please do see that. They talk about how to contain Russia using Ukraine. So Ukraine, of course, has been a tool, and there is something that a lot of people mentioned, that the US would fight the Russians till the last Ukrainian. So you're absolutely spot on target when you said that the Russians have been brought into this war. I personally think that the Russians have been a little stupid, because if this whole thing was being developed for the past 8 years, it needs to be the factor that they should have realized that they are being armed for the past 8 years. They could have done this before, right? If they could seamlessly take Crimea, they could have taken up a different sort of a game. But I'm not sure. I don't know the realities on the ground. I don't know what the intelligence was. I don't know why, and this and that. What we see is the situation in front of us. What we see is these little news articles and a little statement here and a little move here, which give us hints. And my uh, try is to ensure that I'm able to join these dots and give you what I think. You may agree with me or not, that's up to you. But most of the times, I think I have been able to actually picture a right sort of a perspective with regards this particular war and many other analysis that I've been able to do. Either they should have gone with all guns blazing and take out Kiev, then negotiate, made huge mistakes in their war. Well, I don't think so, sir, because they had said that we don't want to damage and this and that. It's a flawed perspective. You may look at it. A lot of Russians don't agree with it. Personally, I felt like the hammer of God is going to come down in Ukraine. It didn't. A lot of military analysts talk about it, that it didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? We don't know. But what is stated from the Russians, and which I tend to believe to a large extent, is that the Ukrainians are the same race as the Russian. They're Slavs. So why would there's a bit of a challenge in terms of this. And do understand they're intermarried. Their grandmother sitting on this side of the border, their brother sitting on this side of the border, husband is from here, wife is from here. It's a very close knit society. So it's you know a Russian soldier would be looking at somebody who looks like his brother from the end of his gun. So it's damn difficult to do that. And I guess that was kept into consideration. I would agree to it to a large extent, and I've actually mentioned the same sort of a scenario with regards to the China-Taiwan conundrum as well. This does create a bit of a challenge. We look back into our own history after the wars. India and Pakistan has always been, it is only now that the cut has happened, but otherwise aman ki asha has always been on the top, because hum to ek jaise hain, ek language hai, ek ye hai. Is the same story over there as well. This stupidity of humanizing your enemies has happened too many times. And the last comment I would take, this war has brought more damage to the European and American economy. You're absolutely correct, sir. The Russian economy is stable. They've been able to actually find alternatives for their oil sales and their gas sales. They are making Turkey as the gas hub for the EU. So the gas will not go through the Nord Stream anymore. It will be sold to Turkey, who will further sell it to the EU. Now, Turkey being a NATO member, it will be accepted because it will be whitewashed with President Erdogan's, you know, sort of a setup. It is interesting that this whole politic is more far front than the people that are losing their lives and livelihoods during this war. Look at the small farmer in Ukraine who is not going to be able to plant his crop this time. It's going to be challenging for him, right? So let's please keep that in mind. It is important that we realize what is happening, how to analyze it, and how to put two and two together without crossing a certain line. And thank you, Venki Saab. Now this YouTube session analysis will be recognized. Sir, are you? I hope you know that's not a back-ended comment at me itself. Thank you so much, all of you guys. It's great that I'm able to actually share my thoughts with you, and you guys are receptive enough of involving yourself in this entire conversation. Couple of things before I sign off: like this video, subscribe, check the bell icons to ensure that you get the entire notification as soon as I put up a video. Of course, you need to ensure that please do spread the word of Dev Talks. If you do want to join the Dev Talks community as on the WhatsApp group, send me a mail with the mail address mentioned in the description, and I'll be glad to add you in to a group of people who are interested, analytical, and very, very smart in terms of the what is happening around the world. Before I sign off, please do remember, if you can, do support the Dev Talks effort by becoming a member, just like Kiran did, or you can just say thanks by clicking thanks below and sending a super sticker or super chat. You can also contribute to me directly by using the UPI number mentioned on your screen. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.